I would like to, I have the honor of introducing Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. General Kellogg served in the first term of the Trump administration as a dedicated and distinguished national security advisor to Vice President Pence and as acting national security advisor to the President. He also served as Executive Secretary and Chief of Staff of the United States National Security Council after completing his service in the United States Army. General Kellogg is presently serving in a variety of consultative capacities, and I know that we all are honored to have him here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me today, and I really appreciate it. You know, the comments we're going to make, it's amazingly consistent. We didn't get together and kind of have these comments beforehand, but all of these comments now are rolling one after another, and there's a consistency to it that I think is important, and it's important that we talk about it today. And so thank you for allowing me to be part of the conference today. You know, I actually started working in the Iranian issue back in 1979, and you heard Senator Tillerson talk about that's when he first became associated with Iran. And I was a young Army major sitting in Stuttgart, Germany, Special Operations Command Europe when the revolution started. And our job was to evacuate and try to move all the aircraft that were U.S. Aircraft that were there in Iran out. We didn't do a very good job with it, but that was our job, and so that's when it all started. You know, a reinforcement of what was said earlier. You know, and this is going to be, it's nonpartisan because it affects both sides, both Republican and Democrat. But I believe that, you know, we really have misunderestimated Iran for the last 45 years. We just haven't got it right. And as a former military guy, you know, I have to refer sometimes to my military background. And there was a classic military book written by a gentleman by the name of Sun Tzu that was 500 BC. And he said, and it's very true even today, he said, you know, if you know yourself and you know the enemy, you're never going to be in peril. But if you know yourself and not the enemy, your chances of winning and losing are basically equal. And we have been consistently wrong about Iran over the last 45 years, and I think President Trump finally started to get it right. We always seem to assume over the last 45 years that, you know, really, you know, when you look at the Iranian leadership, they're actually Jeffersonian Democrats in disguise, and we kind of had it wrong. And it's been a fault of both Republicans and Democrats as well. And I think there has to be recognition, and a real hard recognition now, especially today, that the previous policies toward the Iranian regime have failed to achieve the declared goal, which is a democratic Iran. You know, I'm reminded what the late Pulitzer Prize winner, a gentleman by the name of Will Durant, said when he actually wrote it, and I didn't read it, but there was an 11-volume treatise on the story of civilization. And he said, and this is a quote, "We seem to be working on the assumption that if we're nice to other people, they will be nice to us." And he commented, "I can tell you in the last 4,000 years, there has been no evidence to support that vision." And let me just briefly go back and kind of walk our way through it, because it faults both Republican and Democrat where we're at. You know, under President Clinton, we had a simple trade embargo because we sought a moderate mullah to be in charge of Iran. And at that time, the former director of the CIA, and we eventually became the Secretary of Defense, Bob Gates, wrote, he said, moderate mullah, said, in Iran, that does not exist. And George Bush declared Iran to be part of an axis of evil in 2002 State of the Union, and we condemned them for what they have done. We had President Obama come into office, reversing the Bush sanctions, even sending a letter to the then Supreme Leader declaring constant cooperation between the two countries. That was wrong. We actually had Senator Kerry talk about then the Secretary of State and the Special Envoy Rob Malley, who got a little bit of trouble recently, where he actually downplayed the kind of inspections we were going to have in IAEA. We basically thought that they were going to develop a peaceful nuclear program. You know, and today what they're doing, they're enriching nuclear, the isotopes up to 85%. You know, when you get to 90%, you're weapons grade on enrichment of uranium. Most peaceful uses of uranium, you enrich it between 5 and 6%. And so they must have an ulterior motive of where they're trying to go. So what happened is they came up with an event, and even Chuck Schumer broke ranks when he said this is not a good deal. And what happened, they had an unratified presidential executive agreement, which was not a treaty. That actually played well for us when President Trump came in, because it allowed President Trump to actually walk away from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. And we the Trump administration, we basically said this is not a good place to be, and we wanted to work our way back from it. We began in 2018 a program we called at the time maximum pressure on the Iranian regime, and economically it began to work, and it was a program of time. Now I will tell you, during that administration, the first Trump administration, we actually had people within the administration that thought this was a bad thing to go. Go back to my comment about Jefferson and Democrats. But the pressure began to work. For example, Iran's oil exports dropped from more than 2 million barrels a day to 400,000 barrels a day of export. And their foreign currency fell to $4 billion. And we continually kept pushing back on them, to include the elimination of the Quds Force commander, Qasem Soleimani, after the actions that he pulled off in trying to support the overthrow of the U.S. Embassy in New Year's Day of 2020. And so, but President Clinton came in, President Biden came in, and kind of reversed everything we were doing. So it went back to we looked at who they actually were. But here's the good news. The good news is the world is actually changing. And when you see what happened just recently in the past week with Syria, and the breakdown of what was going on and what was happening with Syria, and that would see what's happening with Iran, what's happening within Russia. Russia could not react to what was happening with Syria. They had the less of the capability they have with the Russian forces. They were forced to evacuate. So all of the problems you're starting to see are starting to change. And I noticed that the great Senator Cruz has come in, so I'm going to really abbreviate my comments. But in the past week, in the past months, we're starting to see a change in the world, and it's a change for the better. And I think we should know that. So the path forward, constant pressure on the Iranian regime. I think we do that politically. We can do that regionally. We do that collectively with all our allies in the region. But also the power of the press, continually press it, and continually pressing the advantage that we have in Iran. This regime is tottering. And I will close this by saying they showed how weak they were when the Israelis went after them. Because what you saw, and I'll just use one example, when the Israelis went after the Iranians and they launched over 150 aircraft and they hit key sites, they did not lose a single aircraft, not one. That should tell everybody that Iran is not as strong as you think they are. They're a paper tiger, and you can push back on them, and I think you can push them to defeat. And with that, thank you very much. So, Senator, glad you're here. I want to give you